You confirmed who owns the ground underneath it, right? I asked Patricia Langford while a nail gun cracked behind her and a forklift backup alarm pulsed through the Saturday morning air. She smiled like I had just complimented the place. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I was 46 years old, and for 8 years I had owned a 2.8-acre property beside the entrance to Maple Glen Estates. That morning, I stood at the end of my secondary driveway watching an HOA construction crew finish what looked like the most expensive mistake I had ever seen. The new community mail center sat on a fresh concrete pad less than 60 feet from me, complete with stone veneer columns, cedar-style roofing, exterior lights, a concrete walkway, and rows of locked metal mailboxes waiting to be labeled. The air smelled like sawdust, wet mortar, and fresh lumber. A worker swept pale stone dust from the walkway, while another adjusted trim beneath the roof. Patricia, the 55-year-old HOA president, stood beside the project in a navy blazer and cream blouse, holding a stainless steel coffee tumbler like she was inspecting a monument she had personally commissioned. "The board approved this months ago," she said. "Maple Glen has maintained this frontage for almost 20 years. I looked past her toward the narrow strip of grass running between my property and the subdivision entrance. I knew that ground. After heavy rain, I walked it to check drainage. I had paid property taxes on my entire parcel since the day I bought the house. And somewhere beneath all that construction activity was an old reference point I remembered seeing near the edge of the strip. I could not see it anymore. What I could see was concrete. A lot of concrete. "That was not what I asked," I said. Patricia's smile tightened. "This is association property, Ethan." Behind her, the nail gun fired again. I could have argued. I could have demanded that the contractors stop. But I was an electrical contractor, not a licensed land surveyor, and one thing years of construction work had taught me was that confidence and measurements were not the same thing. So I stepped away from the work area and took several photographs from my own property. The concrete footprint, the walkway, the landscaping, the location of the building relative to my driveway. Patricia watched me photograph everything. "You are not planning to interfere with the contractors, are you?" she asked. "No." That answer seemed to relax her. "Good. They should be finished Monday." I looked at the stone columns, the new lights, and the roof that was nearly complete. "Looks expensive." This time Patricia smiled completely. "It is an investment in the neighborhood." She walked back toward the contractors while I returned to my house. I did not tell her about the appointment scheduled for 8 o'clock the next morning. Rachel Monroe, a licensed professional land surveyor, was coming to locate the western boundary of my parcel from the recorded property information and field evidence. I still did not know who was right, and that was exactly why I had not stopped construction based on a guess. But as I looked through my kitchen window at that brand new mail center glowing in the morning sun, one thought would not leave me. If Patricia was right, I had wasted the price of a survey. If she was wrong, Maple Glen had just spent a remarkable amount of money improving land it did not own. The strange thing was, I had never cared much about that strip of land until somebody else decided it belonged to them. When I bought the property 8 years earlier, the house and workshop were what mattered to me. I ran a small commercial electrical contracting business, and the detached workshop gave me enough room to store conduit, ladders, testing equipment, and the tools I did not want filling my garage. The 2.8 acres were more than I needed, but I liked the breathing room. The western edge was the awkward part. A narrow strip ran beside Maple Glen's entrance road, widening near my secondary driveway before tapering toward a drainage area farther south. HOA landscapers had been mowing portions of it long before I arrived, and because their grass blended into mine, nobody looking from the road would have guessed there was a property boundary somewhere through that green space. For years, that arrangement did not bother me. Someone cutting a few extra feet of grass for free was hardly a crisis. After storms, I would walk the strip in work boots and watch where the runoff traveled. That was how I remembered an old iron monument near the lower end of the property. It was not impressive, just weathered metal close to ground level, easy to miss beneath grass and leaves. I never treated it as proof of anything because I knew enough about construction to know that a random piece of metal was not automatically a legal boundary marker. Still, I remembered where it was. I also remembered a shallow drainage feature that followed the same general side of the parcel. Those details started bothering me after I saw the mail center. That Saturday afternoon, I pulled the closing folder from the fireproof cabinet in my office. The deed description might as well have been written specifically to remind me why surveyors existed. Bearings, distances, references to recorded information, language that sounded precise, but was useless if you did not know how to properly apply it in the field. I found the county tax parcel map too, but I refused to make the opposite mistake Patricia had made. A tax map was not something I was going to use to march outside and declare exactly where a boundary sat. What it did tell me was simpler. The narrow strip had always been included with the parcel I was taxed on. I leaned back in my chair and listened to construction noise drifting through the closed window. The crew was still working. Every few minutes came the metallic clink of tools or the low rumble of a truck. Then I remembered something else. About 3 weeks earlier, I had noticed bright construction stakes near the subdivision entrance. At the time, I assumed Maple Glen was repairing irrigation or landscaping. I had even waved at the crew on my way to a job site. I had not realized they were laying out a permanent building. By the time I understood what was happening, concrete had already been poured. That was when I called Rachel Monroe. Not because I knew Patricia was wrong, but because I finally understood that nobody involved had shown me anything proving she was right. Sunday morning was going to settle the one question that mattered. Not who maintained the grass, not who approved the project, not who sounded more confident. Where, exactly, did my land end? Sunday morning arrived cold and clear, and at exactly 8 o'clock Rachel Monroe pulled into my driveway in a white survey truck with equipment cases secured behind the cab. She was in her early 40s, practical, precise, and not remotely interested in my theory about who owned what. I liked that immediately. I handed her the deed, the recorded subdivision plat I had downloaded, and every document Maple Glen had sent me. Rachel spread the papers across the hood of her truck, studied them for several minutes, then looked toward the new mail center. "Do not tell me where you think the line is," she said. "I would rather find the evidence first." That was exactly what I wanted. She and her field technician began working across the property while I stayed out of their way. The morning was quiet enough that I could hear the electronic chirps from their equipment carrying across the grass. The construction crew was gone for Sunday, leaving the mail center strangely polished and silent beneath its new roof. Sunlight caught the stone veneer, and the fresh concrete still had that pale, almost chalky color it gets before weather starts aging it. Rachel worked from multiple points instead of walking straight toward the disputed strip. She checked recorded information, searched for physical monument evidence, and took measurements across sections of the parcel I had never paid much attention to. Nearly 2 hours passed before she reached the lower western side. I watched from my driveway as her technician swept through the grass near the drainage feature with locating equipment. Then he stopped. Rachel crouched beside him, cleared away leaves and packed soil, and exposed a weathered iron monument almost exactly where I remembered seeing it years earlier. She did not celebrate. She cleaned it, examined it, recorded measurements, and kept working. Around 11, Patricia drove slowly past the subdivision entrance. Her sport utility vehicle paused near the mail center before continuing toward the clubhouse. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Mark Ellis, Maple Glen's property manager. "Ethan, Patricia says you have surveyors working near association property." "They are working on my parcel," I said. "Are they interfering with the mail center?" "No." "Then what are they doing?" I looked across the grass at Rachel's equipment. "Surveying." There was a pause. "The board already has a site plan." "Good," I said. "Then this should be easy." After the call, I opened the electronic mail Mark had sent me 3 weeks earlier when I first asked about the project. Attached was the same polished landscape plan Patricia had referenced. Green shading covered the entrance frontage, including the area around the new building. It looked official, but now I noticed what was missing. I could see landscaping symbols, irrigation notes, planting beds, and maintenance labels, but nothing on that page gave me confidence that it was meant to establish the legal property boundary. Rachel finally walked back toward me shortly after noon. "I am not giving you a conclusion in the field," she said. "I need to finish the calculations and compare everything before I sign anything." Then she glanced toward the mail center. "But I understand why you called." I followed her eyes to the concrete pad. For the first time since construction began, Patricia's confidence stopped feeling like evidence. By Monday morning, the contractors were back before 7, and the first sound I heard through my kitchen window was a power saw cutting trim beneath the new roof. I carried my coffee outside and watched them finish the structure as if nothing unusual had happened the day before. Rachel had warned me not to treat preliminary field observations as a final boundary determination, so I kept my distance. At 9:15, Patricia walked across the grass from the clubhouse with Mark Ellis beside her. She stopped near my secondary driveway and looked toward the survey flag Rachel had temporarily placed farther down the strip. "Ethan, we need to talk about yesterday," she said. I set my coffee on the hood of my work truck. "All right." Patricia held a folder against her side. "Maple Glen has maintained this frontage for almost 20 years. We mow it, irrigate it, landscape it, and the association has always treated it as common property. Do you have a recorded deed showing the association owns this strip?" I asked. Her expression changed slightly. "We have association records." "Do those records include a recorded easement or a survey establishing this boundary?" Mark looked at Patricia before answering. "The board relied on the approved site plan." "I have seen the site plan," I said. "I am asking what establishes ownership underneath the building." Patricia folded her arms. "You bought your property knowing Maple Glen maintained this area." "I bought what my deed describes. I hired Rachel because I am not qualified to locate that description on the ground myself." Behind us, a contractor switched on one of the new exterior lights to test the electrical work. Even in daylight, the warm glow beneath the roof was visible. Patricia glanced toward it and then back at me. "This project was approved, permitted, and paid for by the association. You cannot interfere with it because you suddenly have questions about a boundary that nobody has disputed for years." "I am not interfering." "Then tell your surveyor to stay away from the construction area." "I am not going to tell a licensed surveyor how to perform her work." That ended the conversation. Patricia walked away with Mark, and I went back inside. At 11:43, an electronic mail arrived from Maple Glen. It instructed me not to obstruct contractors, disturb association landscaping, remove construction materials, or interfere with the mail center project. I read it twice, saved the original message, printed a copy, and placed it beside the landscape plan. Then I replied with 4 sentences. I confirmed that I had not interfered with the contractors, had no intention of touching the structure, and had hired a licensed professional to determine my property boundary. I also requested copies of any recorded deed, easement, plat, or boundary survey Maple Glen believed gave the association ownership or construction rights over the disputed strip. Patricia never answered that question. Instead, the crew kept building. By late afternoon, they had finished the roof trim and installed the final exterior fixtures. I stood beside my workshop listening to drills, footsteps on concrete, and the scrape of a broom across the new walkway. Every improvement made the building look more permanent. That should have made me nervous. Strangely, it did the opposite. Patricia had now put her position in writing, and I had put mine in writing too. I was not stopping anyone. I was not claiming I knew where the line belonged. I was waiting for the person qualified to tell us. Just before 5, my phone rang. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. "I finished the first round of calculations," she said. Her voice was measured. "I need one more field check tomorrow before I finalize anything." I looked toward the stone columns glowing orange in the setting sun. "Is there a problem?" Rachel paused. "There is definitely something we need to verify." Rachel returned Tuesday morning just after 8, and while she worked along the western side of my parcel, the construction crew was putting the final touches on the mail center less than 50 feet away. The contrast was almost absurd. On one side, Rachel and her technician moved carefully through damp grass with survey equipment, checking measurements and physical evidence. On the other, workers wiped dust from stone columns, adjusted exterior lights, cleaned the concrete walkway, and installed the last identification panels on the mailbox units. Patricia arrived around 10 with 2 board members and Mark Ellis. They walked around the finished structure admiring it while one contractor explained the lighting controls. Nobody approached Rachel. I stayed near my workshop because she had already told me she needed room to work without anyone turning the survey into a performance. By noon, the construction trucks began leaving. The saw stopped. The drill stopped. For the first time in weeks, the entrance became quiet. The mail center was finished. Patricia stood beneath the new roof with the board members while Mark took photographs. I could hear pieces of their conversation carrying across the grass. They were discussing landscaping around the walkway and scheduling a community announcement. Patricia looked toward me once and gave a small satisfied nod. From her perspective, the dispute had ended exactly the way she expected. The building was complete, I had not stopped it, and Maple Glen still controlled the site. Then Rachel called my name. She was standing near the lower edge of the strip beside the weathered iron monument they had recovered Sunday. I walked over carefully. "I have enough field information now," she said. "I still need to finish the drawing and sign the survey, so do not treat what I am about to tell you as the final document." I nodded. Rachel pointed toward a temporary marker her technician had placed, then toward another farther north. My eyes followed the direction between them. The line did not run where the landscaping suggested it should. It did not follow the mowing pattern. It did not follow the edge Patricia had been treating as association frontage. It ran directly toward the mail center. I looked at Rachel. "How far?" "I will give you exact dimensions on the completed survey." She walked several steps toward the building and stopped. "But based on the deed description, recorded plat, recovered monument evidence, and the measurements we have checked, most of that concrete pad appears to be inside your parcel." For several seconds, all I heard was wind moving through the trees. The structure looked different now, even though nothing about it had physically changed. The stone columns were still clean. The roof was still new. The walkway was still bright against the grass. Patricia was still standing beside it with the board members. "Could your measurements be wrong?" I asked. "Any professional work gets checked," Rachel said. "That is what I am doing. But I would not ignore this." She packed one piece of equipment into its case and looked at me directly. "Do not touch the building. Do not block access. Do not move anything the association installed." "What should I do?" Rachel closed the case. "Call your attorney." I looked back toward Patricia just as one of the new exterior lights switched on beneath the roof. She smiled at the board members while they admired the finished project. I had spent the last 3 days wondering whether I was about to discover that I had misunderstood my own property. Instead, the question had become much more expensive. Maple Glen had finished the building. Now we had to determine whose ground was underneath it. By Wednesday afternoon, the question finally stopped being a question. Rachel sent me the completed survey shortly after 2, and I opened it at the desk in my workshop while rain tapped softly against the metal roof. I had spent enough time around construction drawings to understand what I was looking at, but I still called her before making assumptions. She walked me through the boundaries she had established using the recorded deed description, subdivision plat, recovered monument evidence, and field measurements she had checked more than once. Then she gave me the number I had been waiting for. At its deepest point, the mail center extended more than 16 feet inside my parcel. Most of the concrete pad was on my land. Part of the walkway was on my land. The landscaping wrapped around a structure that Maple Glen had built where its ownership records did not place it. I stared through the workshop window at the new roof, shining dark beneath the rain. The building had looked permanent on Monday. Now it looked like evidence. I called David Keller, a real estate attorney I had used several years earlier when I purchased a small commercial property for my business. I sent him Rachel's survey, my deed, the subdivision plat, Patricia's written notice, and the landscape plan Mark had provided. David called me back that evening. "First thing," he said, "do not touch anything." Rachel already told me that. Good. No barriers, no signs blocking residents, no electrical changes, no attempt to remove anything. Let us establish the documents before anyone turns this into something it is not. Over the next 2 days, David reviewed the title records and the material Maple Glen had provided. What mattered was not that the HOA had mowed the grass or installed irrigation there. What mattered was whether there was recorded documentation supporting its claimed right to place a permanent structure on that location. So far, David had not found a deed transferring the disputed strip to Maple Glen, and he had not found a recorded easement that explained the footprint of the new mail center. The polished landscape plan Patricia kept relying on became even more important for the wrong reason. It showed planting areas, irrigation, maintenance zones, and the proposed site layout. But it was not the same thing as a boundary survey establishing ownership. Friday morning, David sent a formal letter to Maple Glen requesting the recorded documents the association believed authorized construction at that location. Rachel's signed survey was attached. We also asked the association to preserve its project records, including site plans, approvals, contractor documents, and correspondence related to selecting the location. Patricia called me less than an hour after the letter was delivered. "You hired an attorney over a mailbox building?" she asked. "I hired an attorney because a building appears to be on my property. Our records say otherwise." Then send David the recorded document that proves it. Silence filled the line for several seconds. The board will review this, she finally said. That is all I am asking. After we hung up, I walked outside. The rain had passed, and residents were already stopping near the new structure to look at the mailbox labels. I did not approach them. I did not put up a sign. I did not need an audience. Somewhere inside Maple Glen's files was either a document that could defeat Rachel's survey or an assumption that had somehow survived long enough to become concrete, stone, wiring, and roofing. For the first time, Patricia had to find out which one it was. The easiest revenge would have been the stupidest thing I could do. By Monday morning, residents had started using the new mail center, and I could see cars pulling into the small turnout from my workshop window. People stepped onto the concrete walkway, collected their mail, and drove home without knowing there was a property dispute underneath their feet. David called me before 8 and made his instructions simple. Do not block access. Do not disconnect power. Do not post anything that interferes with residents or mail service. We handle this through documents. I agreed. I had spent my career around electrical systems, which meant I could have made the exterior lights go dark in minutes if I wanted to create trouble. But knowing how to do something did not make it smart, legal, or useful. I wanted my property rights respected, not a neighborhood full of people dragged into a fight they had not created. That afternoon, Maple Glen finally responded to David's letter. Their attorney acknowledged Rachel's survey but said the association was not prepared to accept her conclusions without independent verification. David read the response to me over the phone. That is reasonable, he said. They are hiring their own surveyor. I almost laughed. Patricia thinks that is going to save her. Maybe it will, David replied. That is why we wait. 3 days later, another white survey truck arrived near the subdivision entrance. Patricia was already there with Mark Ellis when I walked outside. She wore the same controlled expression she had carried through every conversation since this began. The association is conducting its own review, she said. Good. She seemed surprised by my answer. You are comfortable with that? I want the boundary established correctly. The survey crew spent most of the day working independently. I did not follow them. I did not point toward Rachel's markers or explain where I believed the line belonged. Around lunchtime, I noticed Patricia standing near the walking path watching one of the surveyors take measurements beside the drainage area. The confidence in her posture had started to change. It was subtle, but I saw it. She was no longer watching like someone waiting to be proven right. She was watching like someone waiting for an answer. The following week, David suggested one additional step. We sent Maple Glen written permission for residents to continue accessing the mail center temporarily while the ownership issue was being resolved. The letter made clear that allowing access did not mean I accepted the association's ownership claim. I liked that approach because it separated the people using the mailboxes from the people responsible for choosing the site. Nobody needed to miss mail because the board had failed to verify a property line. Patricia did not call me after that letter. Mark did not either. For almost 10 days, everything went quiet. The mail center stayed open. The exterior lights came on every evening. The grass around the walkway was trimmed. From the road, nothing looked wrong. Then, on Thursday afternoon, David called. Maple Glen scheduled a special board meeting for Tuesday night, he said. Their surveyor finished his work. I leaned against my workbench. Did they send you the survey? Not yet. So we do not know what it says. No, David replied. But their attorney asked Rachel to attend the meeting. I looked through the open workshop door toward the mail center. Patricia had wanted independent verification. Now she had it. And for the first time since this started, the silence coming from Maple Glen told me more than any argument she had made. Tuesday night, I walked into the Maple Glen clubhouse with David on my right and Rachel carrying a slim survey folder behind us. The room smelled like coffee, carpet cleaner, and the lemon polish somebody had used on the long conference table. Nearly every chair was occupied. Patricia sat at the center with Mark Ellis and the other board members, but the confident expression I had seen beside the construction site was gone. She looked tired. At the far end of the room stood a man I had never met, the licensed surveyor Maple Glen had hired. A large display showed an aerial image of the subdivision entrance. Rachel's boundary was already marked across it. Patricia opened the meeting by explaining that the board had commissioned an independent survey to resolve what she called a disagreement concerning the western frontage. She carefully avoided saying my land or association land. Then she introduced their surveyor. He explained his methodology in plain language: recorded documents, field measurements, monument evidence, and the subdivision plat. I watched Patricia instead of the screen. Then he displayed his boundary. A second line appeared beside Rachel's. For a moment, nobody spoke. The two lines were not perfectly identical at every point, but they were close enough that the difference did not change the problem. Both crossed beneath the mail center site. Both placed most of the concrete pad inside my parcel. The association's own surveyor calmly explained that his independent work substantially agreed with Rachel's location of the property boundary. A board member leaned forward. "How much of the building are we talking about?" The surveyor pointed toward the footprint. The majority of the structure and pad appeared to fall on Mr. Caldwell's parcel. Patricia looked down at the papers in front of her. David did not smile. Neither did I. He simply opened his folder and placed several documents on the table. Rachel's signed survey, the association's written notice instructing me not to interfere with construction, the landscape plan Patricia had relied on, and copies of the project invoices Maple Glen had provided during its review. Stonework, concrete, electrical service, roofing, mailbox units, landscaping. The board had spent association money improving property it had never verified that it owned. David spoke quietly. "My client is not asking anyone to lose access to their mail. He has already provided temporary permission for continued access while this is resolved. What he is asking is that the association stop treating maintenance history as proof of ownership." Patricia finally looked at me. "You knew this might happen before they finished." "I knew there was a boundary question," I said. "That is why I hired Rachel. I did not know the answer until she completed her work." "You could have stopped construction." "With what?" "My opinion." The room went silent again. "Your office sent me written instructions not to interfere," I continued. I followed them. One of the board members slowly turned toward Patricia. That was the moment the balance changed. Not when Rachel found the monument. Not when David sent his letter. Not even when the second survey line appeared. It changed when everyone in that room understood that I had done exactly what the HOA demanded while waiting for professional evidence. Their attorney spoke next. He recommended that the board begin negotiations for a recorded property agreement or easement rather than spend additional association funds disputing two substantially consistent surveys. Patricia stared at the landscape plan in front of her. Weeks earlier, that colored drawing had been her proof. Now it was sitting beneath two professional surveys that told a very different story. 3 weeks after that meeting, I sat across from Patricia in the same clubhouse. But this time there was no audience and no argument left to win. David sat beside me. Maple Glen's attorney sat beside Patricia, and between us was a proposed agreement that finally treated the ground beneath the mail center as what both surveys said it was: my property. The association had considered moving the structure, but once contractors calculated the cost of removing the mailbox units, demolishing the concrete pad, relocating electrical service, rebuilding the walkway, repairing the landscaping, and constructing another site, negotiations suddenly became much more attractive. I did not want a half-finished construction scar beside my driveway, and I did not want dozens of families inconvenienced because their board had made an expensive assumption. So David proposed something cleaner. Maple Glen could keep the mail center where it stood under a recorded easement covering only the area necessary for the structure, walkway, utilities, maintenance, and resident access. The association would pay me for that permanent property right, reimburse my surveying and legal expenses, maintain the entire improvement at its expense, and acknowledge the remaining boundary so there would never again be confusion about where its authority ended. Patricia read the final pages slowly. "You are charging the association for land residents have treated as part of Maple Glen for years," she said. "No," I replied. "I am being compensated for a permanent property right the association needed before it built there." Her attorney gave a small nod. That distinction mattered. Maintenance had never magically converted the strip into association property, and a landscaping plan had never replaced a recorded boundary. The agreement was signed that afternoon. Several weeks later, it was recorded with the county. Maple Glen reimbursed the professional expenses I had incurred and paid the negotiated amount for the easement. The board also adopted a new requirement that any future permanent project near an uncertain property line receive boundary verification before construction approval. Mark sent the policy change to homeowners in a routine community notice without mentioning me by name. Patricia remained president until the next election, but she did not run again. I never celebrated that. I did not need to. The better ending was visible every morning when I backed my work truck out of the driveway. The mail center remained exactly where the HOA had built it. Residents still pulled in, walked beneath the cedar-style roof, collected their mail, and went home. The stone columns stayed. The exterior lights still came on every evening. The concrete Patricia had once treated as proof of permanence became something else entirely. A reminder that building first does not create ownership afterward. Months later, I found myself standing near the western strip after a summer storm, checking the drainage the way I had done for years. Fresh grass covered the disturbed soil around the old iron monument Rachel had recovered. I could hear the soft click of mailbox doors opening behind me. Patricia drove past without stopping. I looked from that weathered piece of metal to the finished structure 16 feet inside the boundary and remembered the question I had asked her while the nail guns were still firing. She had been certain the board had already answered it. In the end, I never tore anything down, never blocked anyone's mail, and never needed to raise my voice. I let the professionals measure, I let the records speak, and I let Maple Glen finish exactly what it had started. The building stayed. My boundary stayed too. The only thing that disappeared was the assumption that the HOA could decide where my property ended.